Yes, I mean, anti-Semitism in our culture today. So I'm going to read you something. It's from Barry Weiss's Friday kind of summary of the news. Always highly recommend, by the way, Barry Weiss's Substack. And the Friday, I think, kind of summary of the news is always entertaining. There's a little bit of humor. And it does give a kind of a perspective on what's going on. Don't always agree with the interpretations, but it's always educational and interesting and fun. So here's one of the stories, not particularly fun story, but here is a story. This is about Dan Kolb, who is an environmentalist, a real left-wing progressive environmentalist, committed environmentalist, but who happens to be Jewish. And he was going to be speaking at the University of California, Berkeley, in a class on environmentalism, about the environmentalist activism and so on. And he's being disinvited from the class because he's an active member of the Jewish community. Now you might say, no, this is all about Israel. But the reality is, he's a real progressive. He actually voted with the city council of Berkeley for a ceasefire. But that's not good enough because he is also a member of the East Bay Jewish Community Relation Council, which, as Barry Weiss writes, does not believe in the full destruction of the state of Israel. How horrible of them. So, so this is from the College of Natural Resources at the University of California, Berkeley. This is their letter disinviting him. Quote, if we are to take equitable environmental action seriously, the very topic you are set to speak to us about, then one cannot dismiss the environmental apartheid occurring in Palestine. Environmental apartheid, and notice that it's in Palestine. For generations, older than the state of Israel, Palestinians have lived, I can't even read this without laughing. For generations older than the state of Israel, Palestinians have lived harmoniously with their land, maintaining long-standing indigenous practices of cultivation. And it goes on and on and on. So before the state of Israel, when this section of land was barely cultivated, a lot of it was swamps and well, it's not swamps. That's so politically incorrect, Yaron. Really, you should stop using the word swamp. When the land was full of wetlands and mosquitoes and malaria, a lot of people were dying in malaria back then in what is today Israel. And deserts, and the few Palestinians who actually lived there were actually cultivating the land the same way they'd be cultivating it for 1,000 years, 1,500 years. Of course, there was the Jews there, but we don't have to pay any attention to them. They're Jews after all. But once the Jews showed up, they turned this place into a hellhole. Toxic waste, industry, modern means of cultivation, genetic engineering of fruits and vegetables to make them taste better. I don't know if you've ever had an Israeli mango or some Israeli vegetables. They taste fantastic, not because that's how nature produces them, because they've been cultivated to do that through engineering. That is a sin. And since you, Dan Kolb, are a Jew who supports the existence of the state of Israel, even if you're kind of pretty pro-Palestinian, you can't be viewed as serious about equitable environmental action unless you are willing to call for the destruction of the state of Israel and for Israel and the rest of the world to return to, what do they call it? Sustainable, long-lasting, indigenous practices of cultivation. In other words, harmony with the earth and no pollution of the pre-industrial era. And what is revealing here is two things. One, the hatred of Jews, the hatred of Israel. But maybe even bigger than that, right? Bigger than that is the hatred of progress, the hatred of science, the hatred of the standard of living that makes it possible for them to go to university, the standard of living that makes it possible for them to care about the environment because they're alive and they're rich and they can afford to waste their time doing that instead of having to engage in indigenous practices of cultivation to feed themselves. I wonder if they go, I wonder how long these people at the, what was this department? The College of Natural Resources. I wonder how long they would survive if they had to rely on indigenous practices of cultivation. Not very long. Not very long. And indeed, I'd say, 80 to 90% of the Earth population wouldn't survive. What they really want is a return to the caves. What they really want is the destruction of human society, human civilization, human progress, human science, human reason, human beings. They are fundamentally haters. Fundamentally haters. All right, just on a little bit more on the theme of anti-Semitism. So there's been a poll by Harvard Capps Harris poll, right? And it found that 2/3 of voters between the ages of 18 and 24, 2/3, over 66% of voters, believe Jews as a class, I didn't know Jews were a class, but anyway, Jews as a class are oppressors and should be treated that way. I've been telling you this. I've been telling you, you're rich and successful, therefore, by definition, you're an oppressor. The fact that not that long ago, you were brutally, massacred just in October, but genocide was committed against you. The fact that not that long ago, Jews were poor and had nothing, but the very fact of raising yourselves out of poverty, the very fact of going from being poor to successful makes you an oppressor. The fact that for 2,000 years, Jews have been killed, slaughtered, raped, tortured all over Europe and all over the world, really, doesn't count because Jews have overcome that and become rich and successful. And therefore, they are the oppressors. 18 to 24-year-old. This is our youth. This is the future of America. If you look at general population, 73% of voters said this notion is false. So once you go over 24, people don't believe this. So this is this new ideology of the last 10 or so years that has infected our schools, our universities, and infected our young people, and that they are fully committed to it. This is intersectionality at its worst, at its most absurd and ridiculous. And it's not like I want Jews to be part of the oppressed class, but this idea that A, they're a class, and B, that there is such a thing as oppressors and oppressed in the world in which we live. We live in America, in a relatively pretty free country, where generally speaking, there are no oppressors and oppressed. There are people who are successful and people who are not successful. And you could argue about why they're successful and why they're not successful. And for the most part, their success and their lack of success is not a consequence of being labeled a Jew or because of skin color and other things. Although if there is racism in America still, and there probably is, and it's likely there is, that needs to be dealt with. But that doesn't seem to be the primary reason white people succeed in America today. So instead of investigating the causes for white people continue to fail, well, of course they're failing. They are the oppressed, by definition, because they're failing. The only reason you would ever fail in life is because you're oppressed. I mean, on so many dimensions, this is a horrific ideology, an evil ugly ideology, an ideology that is equivalent to the ideology of, indigenous practices of cultivation, because it is an ideology that would drive us back to that. It would drive us back to poverty, drive us back to death and destruction, zero-sum mentality of 300 years ago, and not just mentality, reality, which was much more zero-sum. In those days, they were really oppressor and oppressed. And what this mentality will do is get us back to that. Wouldn't it be interesting if some of these people contemplated why it is the Jews disproportionately have managed to come out of poverty and do so well, and maybe emulate some of the things that they did in order to achieve that? That would be assuming people have free will, and that would assume that it's your behavior that gets you places, and that would be a complete negation of the entire egalitarian ideology, which is an ideology of determinism. It's an ideology of lack of free will, and also an ideology that everything you do is determined by your group belonging, by the tribe to which you belong, however they want to define the tribe in any particular given time. So in a Marxist sense, by the class in which you belong. But in a more modern sense, class is out. The ethnic group, the skin color, the national background, whatever you want to define it, that tribe defines your success. There are no individuals, and there is no achievement. There's only oppressors and oppressed, and they're only groups.